Now, the last thing I'd like to talk about is how the White House goes about. We've talked about strategies that might be adopted. When all is said and done, the power of the presidency lies in what we refer to as administrative means. The president is the administrator-in-chief, if nothing else. In other words, he decides what needs to be done. He gives orders as to what should be done and then stays on top of it, or has his staff and staffs stay on top of it and push it through to completion. This is what we mean by administrative means. Okay? The president relies upon the White House staff and the executive office of the president to stay ahead of the curve. Always to know what is happening, what is coming up, what the issues are, what the legislative agenda looks like, what's happening in Congress. Total reliance upon the White House staff and the executive office of the president. That's one kind of administrative means. A second kind derives from the power of the president to make appointments and to review laws and rules. Now, when I say appointments, I don't mean Supreme Court or federal judgeships. We'll talk about that one next week. But I'm talking about the heads of agencies, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, which is an extremely important post. If you believe that that's a high priority, as President Obama did, and to a lesser extent as President Bush did, then you're going to appoint as the head of that administrative office someone who has a reputation for pursuing policies related to conservation and environmental protection. If you don't feel that way, you're going to appoint someone else with a very different point of view. So you see, this is an example of administrative power. The White House, the president, works the bureaucracy, can have, it influences the bureaucracy by two kinds we've talked about so far of administrative means. That is, using the power of his own personal staff and the executive office of the president, for one thing, to know what's going on and to help set the agenda. Second, by appointing people to certain things, to certain agencies. So the power of appointment. Most presidents, or what we have seen growing lately, which is the hallmark of presidential government, is something known as the executive order. I don't keep track of these things, but when I was your age, an executive order was something that was relatively rare. Given the fact that the Congress may not line up behind a president on a particular issue, and given the fact that there may be a lot of constituency public support for a particular issue, a president will say, well, maybe it's better for me to pay the cost of congressional anger and use my power, my inherent power, remember, inherent power, to do something. President Truman integrated the armed forces, and I believe it was 1948. If you can believe our armed forces were segregated on the basis of race, if you can believe that. But it was the case. And President Truman simply ended that by executive order. That was a very Congress at that time would probably never have approved that. But the president said, well, I'm the commander-in-chief, and this is what I have to do to keep my armed forces in good shape, and so I have the power to do it. President Obama took a similar stand on immigration with the so-called DREAM Act, where he simply said, by executive order, people who were brought here below a certain age by their parents and have done certain things will be allowed to stay. That was done by executive order. The president knew that there was significant support for such an action, but he also knew that it would be impossible to get it through Congress in any meaningful way. So he issued an executive order. It's interesting that most of President Trump's activities to date have all been executive orders. They have virtually all been executive orders, one after another, after another, after another. Now, executive orders are well and good, but you have to admit they lie outside the normal chain. And if you go outside the normal chain, then the not normal becomes normal, and we have certain problems for American democracy and due process and checks and balances. But this has been a very quick run-through on the presidency. We've tried to define who the president is, and I want you to see the president is an institution. We've talked about the strategies the president may use. We've talked about the means the president has available. We have made the point that Washington is a huge bureaucracy of which the president is the head, and that raises problems of coordination, how you keep it together. And we've talked about that coordination process. We've also said that given the way the country seems to be lining up, that in past years we have seen a marked rise in the use of executive orders which have their foundation in the notion of implied or inherent powers as found in the Constitution. That's pretty much what I want to say about the Office of the Presidency and the bureaucracy. There may be some other stuff, but I'll send that to you in the mail, or maybe in the next time I get together for some taping. I'll say a few things, but that's it for now. Thanks very much. There's been a question. You probably don't know about the existence of J. Edward Leidenberger. If there's anything good about this course, it's because of Ed and the help that he gives me all the time. And Ed stands behind the camera and he reacts to various things. And when he reacts, I pay attention. When he talks, I listen because he has good things to say. And Ed raised the issue of what about if what the president does in an executive order clearly violates the prerogatives or the rights, the duties of the Congress as established in the Constitution? I think that's the question, okay? When President Truman integrated the armed forces, his right to do so was unquestioned because he was the commander-in-chief. Clearly, he had the right to do that. Certain members of Congress didn't like it, but they had to swallow it. When President Obama puts forth the DREAM Act, it is reasonable to argue that he is interfering with the intentions and indeed the prerogatives, the rights of the Congress. Where does it say that the president decides what the law should be? Congress decides what the law should be. So there is a reasonable argument to be made that what President Obama did was unconstitutional, that he exceeded his authority. And that is one of the reasons that is being adduced or offered for reversing the DREAM Act. I guess what I'm saying is this, that questions that the executive order is a political instrument. If people want something, or if people want values to be allocated in a certain way, if they want a certain level of political goods, they will use whatever means is available to them. In the case of the DREAM Act, we have a questionable act. I personally think it's a good thing, but yes, it is a questionable act. That decision will be decided in that the president did that was response to members of his constituency. He did what he was supposed to do. It's politics. The issue will be decided, if ever, by the Supreme Court. But even then, it will continue, because if it isn't immigration, it will be something else. This shows the continuing process, or shows that politics is a continuing process, and the result of any one time is related to what we referred to earlier as political mood, what the country will bear. Under Obama, the country was prepared to bear with the DREAM Act. Under President Trump, maybe not. We may be sure that however it is resolved will be related to the political balance in the country at the time. And that's politics. Thanks.